My grades suffered, my relationship suffered, everything suffered. And I can remember specific at bats in the fall, whether it was the inter squad scrimmages we had or fall games against other teams, other schools, where I was shaking. I was literally shaking in the box. I thought I was going to puke. It felt like a literal weight. Like I felt weight on my shoulders and I felt like I was 4 feet tall. I remember thinking I felt like I was, a 10-year-old kid. Fear is not one thing. It's actually two things that are stacked on top of each other. Those two things are anxiety and uncertainty. And once you're able to identify them and really understand them and then separate them, you can actually do something about each one. Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Next Season Podcast, episode 48. And I want to talk about something I call closing the gap. And what I mean by that is turning fear and anxiety into confidence. And the closing the gap piece will make more sense for you. But stick around, check out the whole thing, because at the end, I'm going to talk about how you can get your own guide on this topic, your very own guide. So stay tuned to the end for that. But I want to talk about fear and anxiety today. And I want to start by really naming or talking about something that most coaches don't really explain. Parents may not explain. We may not fully understand ourselves until we think about it, but you felt it. Your heart rate spikes. Your chest gets tight. You feel your shoulders start to climb up towards your neck, and you start to feel like this, okay? Your hands ball into fists. You don't mean to make it, but when you bring awareness to those feelings, you realize, okay, I need to, I'm feeling really tight. I'm feeling my heart rate increase. I'm feeling this tightness in my body. I felt it. I'm talking about my freshman year of college, and I go in completely naive to what to expect and thought I would just coast in like I did in college or did in high school. I've shared this story many times, but I had a wake up call and I slumped and everything fell apart on and off the field. And the more that I would try, the worse that I would do. So I pressed and I felt that pressure. Everything sucked. I was injured, but it was more mental injury. It was like mentally, I was awful. My grades suffered, my relationship suffered, everything suffered. And I can remember specific at bats in the fall, whether it was the inter squad scrimmages we had or fall games against other teams, other schools, where I was shaking. I was literally shaking in the box. And I thought I was going to puke. I felt sick and I couldn't see straight. I remember sleepless nights, many sleepless nights. And it wasn't because I was out with friends or up studying. I didn't do a whole lot of studying, unfortunately, but because my mind was a dumpster fire. I was laying in bed, just tossing and turning, just ruminating in my head and frustrated and felt out of place and felt like a fraud. And it wasn't just in baseball, and it wasn't, that many years ago. In fact, this was a year ago. No, this would have been 2 years ago. My wife and I were going through a major decision, an opportunity for us that ended up not working out, and probably for the better, certainly for the better. But for that week or so in that area, that time of uncertainty, I was probably sleeping 1 or 2 hours each night. I was a wreck. Okay. And so even someone who does this work and who coaches people through these things, who has the strategies, I face some of the same challenges. So I'm going back to college, that stress and that anxiety, that fear, nobody told me what that actually was. I just got told to relax, to shake it off, to breathe, to flush it, to let it go, which if you've ever tried that mid at bat or even long term, you know how well that works. It doesn't. Right? It's so hard to just flush it and shake it off, because the more that you try to flush it and let it go, the more you think about it, the more it presents itself. So today I'm going to break down what fear actually is, what's driving it, what's creating it, what kind of the formula for fear, in a simple process that you can apply to help kind of break that down in the moment and a long-term strategy to address it. So let's get into it. So let's start with understanding that fear may not be what you think that it is. And to get more specific about my freshman year in college, again, fall of freshman year, I'm not in a good spot. And I remember one specific scrimmage against another school. I step into the box against a guy who threw, at that time, he threw harder than anyone I've ever seen. At least it felt that way. And he had nasty braking stuff too that I couldn't pick up. So I was already a mess going into it, but then I faced this guy, felt like it was 110 miles an hour. I couldn't see straight. It felt sick. And I knew, like, I was defeated before a bat even started. And I felt something I hadn't really felt before. It wasn't really nerves. And looking back, it's still very vivid to me. It felt like a literal weight. Like, I felt weight on my shoulders, and I felt like I was 4 feet tall. I remember thinking I felt like I was, a 10-year-old kid. That's how tall that I felt against, it was a freshman. I was a freshman against a freshman. So same age, but I felt like I was inferior. My chest was tight. I felt sick. My hands felt like they weren't mine. Everything felt like slow motion except for the fastball that was coming in. And I remember thinking, why does this feel so much bigger and heavier than it should? Like, I've done this so many times, thousands and thousands of times. Why is this one different? And I didn't have a name for it, but I do now. Here's something that changed how I coach this. Fear is not one thing. It's actually two things that are stacked on top of each other. Those two things are anxiety and uncertainty. And once you're able to identify them and really understand them and then separate them, you can actually do something about each one. So let's do that. I want to start with anxiety. And real quick, I want to make a distinction because I think this really matters. Feeling anxious in a moment is not the same as having anxiety. Okay. One, think about like a wave that passes through. Okay. That wave is representative of the ocean, but it is not the ocean, right? Feeling anxious is not necessarily having anxiety. Okay. Having anxiety is something that sticks around and is more permanent in your life for a period of time. Doesn't have to be permanent forever, but it's more chronic or it's more sustained. We're going to get into that difference shortly. And a lot of guys don't love the word anxiety. I know I didn't really relate to it. And it can feel like a label. And I think, in my opinion, it can be overused and misused. Like something's wrong with you. And it's not. Even if you do suffer from clinical anxiety, doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It's just a situation, right? It's just a situation that you're facing. It's serious, but there are strategies. So if that word doesn't land for you, you might relate more to simply calling it pressure instead. It's the same mechanism. It's the same gap. Oftentimes the same feelings, but just something that you can relate to. So call it whatever it gets, whatever gets you to actually pay attention to it. But you got to name it and you got to own it. And that's okay. Because here's what's actually happening from a brain standpoint. Your amygdala, which is the part of your brain that is built to detect threats, doesn't know the difference between that lion that could eat your face off, right? Go check out episode 47 if you're confused what I'm talking about, and a full count with a tying run on second base. It just reads that there's a gap. This feels bigger than what I can handle right now. It's what I thought, right? This situation, this at bat feels bigger than I can handle. And when it reads that gap, when your mind reads that gap, driven by the amygdala, but there's other brain processes too, it fires off that same stress response as that, staring at a lion who could eat your face off, right? Your heart rate goes up, your muscles get tight, your attention narrows, and that gap is the whole thing, right? It's that fight, flight, or freeze again we've talked about so many times. That is anxiety, okay? And this may not be the clinical description or diagnosis, but from an everyday, layman's terms understanding, this is the way that made the most sense to me as I sought out to understand it and work with the athletes that I work with. There are two factors that I use to define anxiety. On one side is demand. More specifically, it's perceived demand, okay? What you think is needed or expected of you in any given moment or activity or situation, right? So you're saying to yourself, this is what I need to be able to do for me or my team or my family, whatever it is, right? There's perceived demand. Then there's your capability or your perceived capability, what you actually believe that you can handle. So this is what you think is expected of you or needed of you or demanded of you. And this is what you think you can handle, you can do. And when those two factors, when those perceptions of those factors, right, are wider, the wider that gap gets, the more that your anxiety increases. The bigger the gap, the more pressure you feel, the more anxiety you feel. Okay. The key word in here in both these elements, though, is perceived. And here's the part that trips most people up, because we allow that self-doubt to creep in, and we are more capable in general than we believe we give ourselves credit for, right? We're more capable of what we believe we are, and or the demand often is actually less than the mountain that we're making it out to be. Okay? It could be both of those things, but certainly it's often at least one of those things. And it has almost nothing to do with the actual situation in front of you. I've watched this exact same thing happen with guys that I coach, right? Same lineup, same pitcher, back to back at bats. You can see in their shoulders, you can see physically. I was texting one of my athletes recently. He sent me a video of his just batting practice at bats, and I could feel, I could see a difference in his body posture and how relaxed he was from a couple weeks prior when he was in a different situation. Okay. So again, you can observe it. And when you bring awareness to it, you can feel it yourself. But it's often in those exact, like the perceived demand and the perceived capability is no different, but it's what we believe about it, believe it to be. So the distinction between anxiety and feeling anxious, I want to come back to that in a second. If that gap shows up and it's gone by the next pitch, the next at bat, the next play, that's not a problem. Again, that you're bringing awareness that that's just feeling anxious in that moment. That's just part of competition. That's feeling anxious, feeling pressure. It's supposed to be there, right? It means you care. But if you're feeling that same feeling and tightness every single time and you feel it maybe even getting worse, it doesn't lift away, there's nothing that you can do, or you feel like there's nothing you can do, that's not something that you can fix necessarily with a breathing technique when you're stepping in the box. It's a bigger conversation with a coach, a parent, someone you trust, or a professional to help you navigate through that. But again, you can do it. One thing I'll say in that, and I mean this, you're not supposed to carry that weight completely alone. Okay. If you're feeling that weight constantly, you don't need to do this alone. Part of this whole process is learning that you can hand off some of it, you can offload some of it instead of trying to white knuckle it by yourself. Okay. You don't have to do that. So that's the anxiety piece or the pressure piece, whichever word works for you. So it's the perceived demand to perceived capability. And the bigger the gap, the more anxious you feel. The second part of fear is uncertainty. And underneath every anxious moment, your brain is quietly trying to figure out, trying to answer three specific questions. And until it gets those answers, you're going to sit in that discomfort, that uncertainty. And that is the other part of fear. So again, the first part we just covered anxiety. Now we're going to cover the second part of fear, which is uncertainty. Your brain is seeking answers, is trying to find answers to three questions. How long is this going to last? So in one word, it's duration. What do I actually need to do right now? In one word, that is direction. So how long is it going to last? Duration. What do I need to do right now? Direction. And what's probably going to happen? What's most realistic, or what's the worst case? What is the best case? There's different ways to ask this question, but in one word, it's destination. Duration, direction, destination. And when your brain doesn't have those answers, it doesn't just sit patiently and wait for it. That is the heavy uncertainty that you sit in. It fills in the blanks, and it's almost always going to fill them in with a bunch of crap. It's going to fill them in with a worst case scenario, the worst version. And that's not you necessarily being dramatic. That's literally what an uncertain brain defaults to. It's supposed to do. It's a threat detection system because it reads no information as danger. Your brain craves certainty. This is why we fall into bad habits, because bad habits oftentimes are what we know. Even if we know it's not good for us and we repeat them, it's because there's a feeling of certainty in the brain, homeostasis in the brain, and it says, I want to default to that. Okay. So here's what I want you to know about this. Think about a moment right now, recent, or maybe something that you're dealing with today or recently, where that uncertainty had a real grip on you. And like you felt like you were spinning because you didn't have the answers to those questions. How long is this going to last? What do I need to do? Where do I need to go? What direction is it going to take? What's most realistic? What's the outcome going to be? So again, if we're talking about the three, it's duration, direction, and destination. If you don't have those answers, think about a situation. I want you to maybe even close your eyes. Okay? Bring awareness to that situation. And now be honest with yourself. Did you actually have real answers to those three questions? Or was it your fear just making stuff up to fill in the silence, to fill in those blanks? I want to tell a story real quick about the sister of an athlete that I work with. And this young lady is not a client of mine, but awesome young lady, great athlete, and somebody who has told me we developed a little bit of a relationship and friendship, and she's told me she has a lot of fear. I won't say it's debilitating, but it's pretty serious of staying home by herself. And she's at an age where, many young ladies at her age would be able to do that and staying home by herself. And even if family members are home, being in certain rooms alone by herself. So it's not clinical, but it's those types of things are certainly triggers for her. And she told me the other week, and I don't know what prompted her to do this, but she made a decision that to help, because we've talked about this. We've talked about taking little steps to address it, and then thinking about that as the evidence that you are building, that you can be more confident, more courageous. Okay, we're gonna come back to that. So the other week, she tells me, she pulls me aside, says, "Hey, Coach Kevin, um, I actually slept outside on the balcony at the beach." So she was at the beach on vacation, and she slept outside on the balcony. And we talked about how, without even her realizing it, that she was able to answer those questions again without thinking about it of what do I need to do? How long is this going to last? And what's the most realistic or likely outcome? And once she was able to separate this activity that it was so terrifying for her, being outside by herself on this balcony, and she had the answers to the questions. If she could think rationally about it, she knew how long it would last. She knew what she needed to do, what was expected of her, demanded of her, right? Is to simply set up a bed and go outside and stay outside. And she knew the most likely outcome was that she was going to wake up in the morning and have a beautiful sunrise. Okay. So she knew that was the most likely outcome. So the rational side of her brain was able to help her endure that situation. We're going to come back to that story. And here's the thing about this that's kind of freeing once you see it. A lot of what feels like fear is really just missing information. So you're anxious and uncertain. And that's the real combination that creates fear, right? So your perceived demand has a wide gap from your perceived capability. Again, perception is the key word. And you feel like you don't have the answers to those three questions. Those two things combined create fear. Now, let's take this a little bit further. You can be anxious without being uncertain. So you can have that big gap, but have the answers to the questions. And that's just you being amped up, ready to go. That feeling of anxiety, but you have certainty in the situation. You're just amped up. Okay. You can be uncertain. You can lack the answers or believe you lack the answers to those questions without being anxious. And that's basically being excited. You don't know exactly what's coming, but you know it's probably good. It's the same uncertainty, completely different experience, depending on what else is stacked on top of it. So that's the second part of this. So we've got our anxiety or anxious feelings. We've got the uncertainty. So what do? We're going to talk about the process. And what the process I call is closing the gap. There's 4 parts. And this is simple enough that you can run it between pitches, right? Once you get good at it. It takes practice, but you can run this. Once you speed it up, you can run it anytime you need to. First, notice what's happening. You don't need to fix it yet. Okay. You just bring awareness to it. Just name it. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What's happening in my body right now? Where is it? Where am I feeling it? And that alone is going to start to loosen that grip. So that's the first step. Just notice what's happening. Second is get specific about what you actually want out of this moment. Okay. Not the whole game, not the whole season, just this one at bat, this one play, this one rep. Like break it down, chunk it down to the most small thing that you can. What do you want to get out of it? What do you want to walk away having done or learned or overcome? Okay. So bring awarenesses first, get specific about what you actually want to get out of this moment. And then third is go back to those 3 questions. What do you actually know? How long can you realistically hang in this situation, right? How long can you endure? What's the one thing that you need to do right now? And then do it. And if it's bigger, it's not when you feel ready. You do it right now. Okay. So you bring clarity, you bring answers to those 3 questions. I'm going to repeat it again. First step, bring awareness. Second step, get specific about what you want to get out of that moment. Third, bring clarity, bring answers to those 3 questions, or as many of them as you can. Okay. What do you actually know? How long can you do this? What's the one thing you need to do right now? But then move, take action. And the fourth, and this is the one almost everyone skips, is reflect. Give yourself that credit, right? Take a moment and look back on what you did in those 3 steps. Reflect on it and give yourself credit for what you did, whether it went perfectly or not, whether you got the outcome of the result that you wanted or not. You faced something uncomfortable, uncertain, and instead of running from it, you faced it. That's not nothing. That's actual evidence that you can build on. So going back to that young lady that slept outside, the other thing that I talk with her about multiple times before this and certainly after is literally writing down every time that she did something that stretched herself or was a little bit scary. When she sees me at a game and she tells me something she did, I still ask her if she wrote it down. Said, hey, did you write it down? We say, I've got the receipts, and this is her getting the receipts. It's her printing her receipts of the evidence. So anytime that she does something and she brings it up, now she seeks me out and tells me, hey, I did this, I did that, this little thing. And I always say, did you write it down? And I like to think of these receipts as bricks. And what she's doing is she's building her wall of confidence, brick by brick, with the evidence that she can do things that build confidence and narrowing that perception gap, overcoming that fear. It's not about being fearless, but about being courageous. It's not being devoid of anxiety or uncertainty, but being self-aware, acknowledging what she knows and taking action. That's building confidence. We're going to come back to that in a second. There's one more piece I want to give you because the how long will this last question is often one of the heaviest, more difficult ones to answer. Slumps. A rough stretch. 0 for 14 turns into 0 for 16, turns into 0 for 20. Wondering if you're ever going to get a hit again. And that's when it gets really too big to hold because you oftentimes don't have the answer to that question. Baseball is not a timing sport necessarily. And that's exactly what most guys, when that timing is so unknown or so far away, that's when guys quit internally. And the move here is, again, to shrink your focus down to something that you can actually manage. So it's not about managing the slump. You're in an 0 for 20, you're in an 0 for 30. Okay. You don't need to manage that slump. You don't need to think about the season. You manage the at bat. Then you think, okay, I don't even need to manage that at bat. I need to manage the pitch. Then you say, I don't even need to manage the pitch. I need to manage my setup and my swing decision, my approach. You want to make it as small as it needs to be until it's something that you can actually hold and control. There's a rule in banana ball that I love for this. It's win the inning. And it doesn't matter if you give up 13 runs, like if the Bananas give up 13 runs in an inning and blow the whole thing wide open, because once that inning is done, it's done. It counts for 1 inning, nothing more. You reset and you move on to the next one. and you could put up 20 on the team in the next inning. And again, it just counts as one. And that's the whole idea. You shrink things down to size, handle what's in front of you, and let go of the rest. You narrow the length of time of the past, you narrow the length of time in the future, and you lock into the present moment. You can process the past and prepare for the future at a different time. You don't need to worry about that. But if that past you're holding on to is so big, and the future that you're feeling nervous or pressure or anxious about is so big and so long in the future, okay, that's going to be way too much for your brain to process in the present moment. You need to shorten those. You need to lock into the present, and you can address those at a different time. Back to confidence. I want to end with this, because confidence gets talked about like it's a feeling that you wake up with or you don't. It's not. Confidence is built. It's built through 3 specific things. I've talked about this so many times. It's courage, consistency, and keeping the promises that you make to yourself. And that's what that young lady did. She was courageous. She's been working at it consistently. And when she said she was going to do something, even if she said it in a moment of ignorant bravery, and she didn't really feel like doing it when the time came to do it, she kept the promise she made to herself. You are never going to eliminate uncertainty from competition. That's not the goal. You can't rehearse pressure away. It's going to show up no matter how prepared you are. What you can control is whether you act with courage in the moment and whether you show up the same way over and over, and whether you keep those small commitments that you make to yourself when nobody's watching. That's the real order. Like, that's really how you build confidence. Most people think they need to feel confident before they act, and it's the reverse. You act, and then the confidence shows up afterward as proof, as the evidence. I cannot begin to tell you the number of times that I walked into a room feeling like an imposter, but stepped up and delivered. Every time that I click record on this, I'm scared. Every time that I've reached out to guests that I want to have on or get ready to record with a guest, I have a feeling, like I had this feeling, should I just cancel it? And because I'm scared. But I also know that I prepared for this, that I am equipped. I'm not alone. I have all the courage I need from my creator to do this and more. So there's certainly an internal conflict about it, but you face it with courage. Here's what I want you to take with you. Fear isn't some mysterious thing that just happens to you. It's anxiety plus uncertainty. And both of those things are things you can actually work with. Notice it, get clear on what you want, answer what you can, act anyway. Shrink it down, chunk it when it gets too big, and give yourself credit when you show up. Confidence is not the starting point. It's what you build. One act of courage, one kept promise at a time. I put this whole process into a free guide that I call Closing the Gap. Okay, it walks through everything we talked about in this. What is fear? What is anxiety? What is uncertainty? What are all those elements? What to do about it? And there's a couple more tools in there that we didn't have time for in this episode. If you want it, drop the word confidence in a comment on whatever platform you're on, or DM me. I'm going to send you a copy of this and I can debrief it with you. It's not going to be some bot response. It's going to be me. If this one hit home, send it to somebody who needs it. And if you want an honest read on where you're at right now, there's 2 free assessments on the site. So I can get you the Closing the Gap, but I can also get you 2 free assessments. One is for active athletes and the other is for Atlas athletes figuring out life after sport. You can find all those at nextseasonathletes.com. Appreciate you. We'll see you next time.